Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Mike Okwache. The year 2014 is still new, fresh and in a mint condition. It is a year pregnant with ideas where there is more to mint than just peppermint candy. The Mint, an acronym for emerging economies to watch, is made up of Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria and Turkey. Jim O'Neill, the man who developed the concept of BRICS in 2001, says Mint could prove extremely profitable for investors in the next decade or two. What are your thoughts on Africa as a new economic frontier in global economy? Talk to us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. We'll take a report to launch the show, and Africa Today will be right back. Welcome on board.
American investment expert Joseph Mark Mobles has forecast accelerated growth for the economies of Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria and Turkey, believing that they will possibly take global attention for the next decade. Putting these nations on the acronym MINT, Mobles says that stock markets in these four nations will grow throughout 2014, possibly turning them to investment hubs. With growth rates averaging 6 to 7% per annum, Mobles believes that MINT nations may offer a faster route to riches. But this Nigerian economist is not impressed by the suggestion of growth for Nigeria. He points to dead business infrastructure in the economy.
To have growth rates of 5, 6, 7, 8% existing side by side with abysmal poverty is contradiction. So I'm saying take your mind away from the BRICS, MINTs or whatever classifications and things like that, and think more about how best the lives of the people of this country or the countries you have mentioned can be positively transformed.
Comparing economic energies of MINT nations to BRICS economies of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, the American experts believes that the next decade may no longer be for the BRICS. Mobles gives reasons ranging from high cost of living to rising wages in BRICS economies as pointing to gradual drop in profits in enterprises. On the other hand, he says that MINT nations hold virgin opportunities in key sectors like energy, technology, defense equipment and agriculture.
Those things that drive growth in all countries worldwide are not applicable to Nigeria. In other words, you cannot be talking of sensible or meaningful growth without, for example, this small and medium enterprises subsector of each of these economies.
Now the MINT nations are here. Investment decisions by businessmen, funds managers and transaction negotiators will show the way.
All right, thank you very much for staying with us. First, it was the BRICS, a group made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. It was followed by CIVETs, made up of Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt and Turkey, which never really took off. Now we have MINT. To discuss the MINT countries on Africa Today, we have Dr. Mashood Fashola, an economist and lecturer at the University of Lagos here in Nigeria. It's good to have you join us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome to the program today.
Thank you.
It's all right.
Good evening.
And then later on the show, we'll be linking up on phone with Dr. Oladiran Bello of the South African Institute of International Affairs in Johannesburg. Now, let's start it this way. BRICS, CIVETs, MINTs, acronyms and so on. What's your analysis of all these acronyms put together?
I feel that conditions are changing.
Okay.
And these countries are having prospects for development in terms of market demand. Right. There's this theory that we call convergence theory.
Okay.
Countries that are developing have high demand for most products. We talk of income elastic demand. At low level of development, almost all products are on high demand. Construction, housing, food, name it. But you see, for developed countries, they have reached saturation point. They can satisfy almost anything that is needed. So their demand is focused on entertainment industry. For these countries, they are still growing, and there are a lot of population that are yet to be exploited. So there are a lot of potential for their development. Once you have signs of good governance, infrastructure development, then there is a large prospect for rapid development. In Nigeria, for instance, We have very huge population. You can talk of labor force, about 80 million people. Less than 10% are employed in formal sector. That means if out of 80 million people, 80 million are just the one working, then the remaining 72 million, if you can mobilize them, that will mean tremendous growth. On the other hand, agriculture is neglected. If you can put agriculture in place, you can experience rapid growth through agriculture to the tune of 20% for that sector. So they know that there are untapped resources, enormously untapped resources.
All right, but let me ask, you just talked about Nigeria now. Yeah. For instance, if we have to put Nigeria on the platform, Nigeria has a lot of challenges in the area of infrastructure, electricity, and so on. Is it not surprising that Nigeria is still found amongst the prospective countries for prosperity?
Yes, it's not surprising because Nigeria earns a lot of income from exports of oil and gas. Okay. That is being used gradually for investment in many areas, including energy. You know that there are, when you talk of energy infrastructure, you are focused on federal government. There are some state governments now that are doing fine. So, like construction is going on in a lot of places. Security is improving. When you have improving security, they are creating a favorable environment for investment. So, and people know that investment is also welcome in the energy sector. So the energy that is having a problem is also a challenge. It's a prospect.
Okay.
For those who invest in energy.
All right. Let me ask. Before coming up with these acronyms, BRICS, CIVETS, MINT, what are the foundational criteria? What are the things one looks at before these things are put together?
I think it's an environment for favorable investment. Okay. Now, when you start to have more stable government and greater security to life and property, less political stability. When you look at Nigeria these days, we have political instability largely in the northeast. Okay. But for the large part of the country, from the middle belt downwards, there are tremendous stability and good governance. So, even government is coming up, the educational sector is improving, construction is improving, there's better management. There is a reduction in inflation rate.
Okay. I'll come back to hold you on this because some Nigerians, you've been talking about Nigeria, how does that translate to food on the table for an average man? We'll come back to that, however. But joining us from South Africa, the Institute of International Affairs, Dr. Oladiran Bello. Doctor, it's good to have you join us now. Now, we have seen African countries feature in economic blocs like the BRICS and now MINT. What does all this imply for the continent?
Well, I think it's certainly a good thing that many of these acronyms are invented. BRIC was invented a little while back by a gentleman from Goldman Sachs. I think that's turned into something that has what I think is quite meaningful for some of the countries involved. It's not as an economic going concern, certainly as a geopolitical construct, and in that sense, I think there have been concrete benefit from it. I think if Nigeria, Mexico, Indonesia, and Turkey can follow the BRICS example to really close ranks, to coordinate their action closely in the economic realm, and also try and coordinate in a way that give them a far weightier geopolitical clout on the global stage, we can see it become something quite meaningful. And I say this for a number of reasons. One needs to look at the makeup of these countries, and the four of them, I think in one sense they are competitors. I think one thing that's common to all of them, they are aspirants to what you might call the status of low-cost manufacturing center. China is going to move on at some point. The cost of labor in China is already becoming quite expensive. So these are countries positioning to occupy that niche that China in the future would vacate. But beyond this status of the main countries as competitors, I think there is a lot they can do together that can produce quite a number of win-win for them. If you look at all the countries, one similarity, again, is the fact that they're geopolitical outsiders. Turkey trying to get into the European Union, that's not been possible. So looking to refashion an alternative economic vision. Nigeria in Africa would like to be in the G20, where South Africa represents the continent, whether rightly or wrongly. Next year, Nigeria's economy would probably be regarded as the biggest on the continent as a result of the GDP rebasing exercise that we're all expecting.
All right, Dr. Bello. Dr. Bello, sorry for cutting you, but let me ask you this. What factors make the main countries unique and relevant in global economy?
What factor makes you relevant in the global economy? I think definitely size, counts. And South Africa's place in BRICS and the G20, as I mentioned, is not an accident. For quite long, it's been the biggest economy on the African continent. The G20 itself came together as a result of this feeling that to reach meaningful agreement, you need to first strike a deal among the biggest economy. So in that sense, Nigeria emerging as the top economic power in Africa, I think would do a lot for the country in terms of the way it tries to position itself continentally and also globally. So economic size does matter, but you also have to look at the qualitative dimension in terms of where you are specialized along the global value chain. It's true that many African countries are further down that global value chain in terms of the primary product that many African countries produce. But I think these are exciting times. We're hearing of this boom in Africa in the past, as recently as the 1970s. When we've seen that, it's been as a result of the extractive sector boom. I think what we're seeing in Africa today is a much more diversified basis for growth, the banking sector, telecoms, and all of that. And I think very encouragingly, Nigeria has been very much a central part
Dr. Bello,
of this positive story.
Dr. Bello, thank you very much. We'll come back to you again, certainly. Let's talk about other things, however. Now, I was asking you before Dr. Bello came online. When you measure, you were talking about growth in different parts of the economy and the country and all of that. How does that translate to food on the table and the standard of living for the average African?
That's a very good question. The governments of various components of the nation, like in Nigeria, top of states, they realize that they must develop agriculture to make food cheap. Apart from the fact that we are earning a lot of foreign exchange with which bring in food, bring a lot of food, and that's so we have abundance of food due to importation. But we cannot continue to rely on this. It will not be sustainable. Anything can happen. So there's now focus on agriculture. We focus on agriculture, that will give employment. A lot of people are being assisted to go into farming, so they will become, joblessness will reduce, and then food will become more abundant, part will be exported. So I think the major focus for putting food on the table is through agriculture that will reduce poverty and joblessness.
But are the African leaders, are they working on that? Would you say an average African, not necessarily Nigeria, but the point is, are Africans better off with all of the belonging to all these economic blocks and so on?
I think they are realizing the importance, the strategic requirement of agriculture all over Africa now.
Because agriculture is the basic key, is that what you're saying?
There's realization of the need to develop agriculture. You know, the mint countries have a lot of potentials, which include plenty of land, a lot of on land that's yet to be exploited, large population, and then there is growing liberal approach. You know, there's less freedom, there's more freedom, there is better governance, there is increasing political stability. I think the monetary policy management is improving, and then the world, there's growing globalization, which makes it possible for people all over the world to go and invest in any country. Foreign direct investment can go anywhere. And so these countries are attracting foreign investment. And because some parts are having problems, like Europe, so people are looking for alternatives. Okay. So with improvement in governance, people are looking at this country. When you look at Nigeria, we may say we have some problem at federal level, but a lot of state governments are improving.
Okay.
Yes, there are a lot of improvement in many states of the Federation today.
It's okay. We'll come back to this. Now, the Mint countries are believed to be the next global economic powerhouses, but some are quick to remind that those who invested in the BRICS in recent years would have done better keeping the money at home. Now, only China has really lived up to the hype and is now the world's second biggest economy. We'll take a quick time out, and Africa Today will be right back. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. It is believed that the Mint countries all have the basic building blocks for economic growth. Yet they face substantial challenges ranging from corruption, debt burden, poor infrastructure, and education. Now, you were talking about some of the things they have in common, like the population, relative stability, and all of that. But let me ask this: what parameters are used to measure this kind of growth? Because when you talk about, you mentioned inflation earlier on, you just mentioned investment inflows into these countries, but what parameters do you use to measure growth?
The parameters is that there are a lot of untapped resources. The prices for most of these resources that they export are good these days. Like Nigeria, for a long time now, we've been having price of crude oil around $100. You know, don't forget that there were many years that the price was below $10. So now, these resources that go for a long time help the nation to develop very sound foreign reserves, a lot of money around, so they can actually have capacity to import, to have, they are credit worthy, well, a lot of reserves. So, like I said, you have a lot of population that are still idle. When you have a situation where you are getting them through manpower development, there are prospects.
Yeah, but when you talked about a large population being idle, and then you're talking about growth, doesn't that contradict each other?
No, this large population are being mobilized. Okay, their mobilization will create more income. Now, when you look at about 80% of the labor force that are virtually idle, not doing much, if you can make them work, it's going to be a lot of resources.
Yeah, because
demand.
Because Doctor, when you say if you can,
yes,
because that's different from what is on ground. That's what I was asking. Are Africans better off, as the case may be? But however, we'll come back to this. We have Dr. Bello back online again. Excuse me, Doctor. How much does Africa stand to gain from economic alliances like the BRICS and Mint?
I think how much Nigeria and Africa as a whole gains ultimately will be down to the question of how well we've done our own homework. And I think there is a lot of work to do in this respect. There is a lot of excitement around Nigeria today in terms of the breakneck economic growth rate, consistently about 7% now. For quite a few years, the best part of the last decade. So Nigeria effectively has been on autopilot. It's true that there have been some significant improvements in terms of the macroeconomic policy framework, political stability in a broad sense, even though we've seen pockets of instability right across the Northeast and also in the Niger Delta, where we continue to see some serious security challenges. So the question to ask is, if Nigeria succeeds in resolving some of these teething problems, how much can Nigeria achieve economically? I think the country can easily, join the category of countries that are recording double-digit growth like China did for many years. So that's one part of the homework we have to get right if we're going to profit from alliances such as those with the main countries. I think coupled to that, Nigeria also needs a tighter focus in a number of areas. I think in terms of our regional economic diplomacy, We've seen a lot of improvement in that respect, but plenty to do still. Like the country's foreign policy itself, Nigeria's economic diplomacy has to take the West African region, as its centerpiece. You see South Africa's Cloud in Africa started from the SADC region. I think Nigeria can replicate the same thing with respect to its West African neighbor. If Nigeria is powering ahead economically, this will not be sustainable in the longer term, except our West African neighbors are doing well, and we're taking all the right economic opportunities that this emerging environment provide for us. Just to look at the number of the figures, you see throughout this region a higher rate of schooling, reduced mortality. About 85% of people right across Africa living in relatively stable countries, about 45 of them out of Africa's 54 states, where about 94% of the continent's GDP is generated. And that's the consistent story we're seeing in West Africa. I think Nigeria has to better position to take advantage of the economic opportunities in this immediate region if it's going to have a bigger political voice continentally and globally. It's the only way you would be respected in a forum like Mint, and you would be seen as a credible interlocutor who can actually deliver on the deal, when these deals are done. So Nigeria needs to improve in that respect. I think a third dimension of what needs to be done is in terms of the way we are.
All right, Dr. Olajuwon Bello.
The traditional powers.
Yeah, Dr. Bello, thank you very much. That's so much we can take on the program now. Thank you very much for lending a voice on Africa Today. Now, as we gradually wind down on the program, the point there is some analysts will say that such kind of acronyms like BRICS and MINTS and so on did not really originate from Africa. So it may not necessarily be meant to benefit Africans like the investors of the West. What do you say?
You see, attention has been drawn of the world to where there are prospects.
Okay.
But let's talk about this. There is no doubt that there is some seriousness about good governance in this country. But there's still a problem of widespread poverty and joblessness. If this is not addressed, it can lead to political crisis and instability. So the prospects may not be sustainable unless we address injustice. There's need to urgently get rid of the tremendous poverty. Nigeria is one of the leading countries with largest population below poverty line. In Africa, for instance, when you take it's Nigeria, Chad, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Niger, that have large population below poverty line, up to 65%. So these can be a time bomb for political crisis.
All right. So would you have advocated that all these issues should have been taken care of before Nigeria becomes a member of MINT, for instance?
They see that if you are taking care of it gradually, there will still be. Nigeria has a lot of enormous prospect for fast growth. Enormous. Even if you take agriculture alone, working on agriculture alone, we can sustain growth of 10% for several years.
But does prospects and capacity, does it translate to actual prosperity?
Well, the capacity is there, but what is giving the obstruction is corruption. If you can nip corruption, if you can check corruption, you see enormous freeing of a lot of resources. And the media is helping a lot to check corruption. So when the media exposes corrupt practices, people are more serious-minded. Look, I don't want to mention states. Some states are making enormous progress now in terms of agricultural development, educational development, construction, transportation.
Okay.
And these are transitioning into fast growth.
Okay. Yeah. As an economist, when you sit down and put Africa on a platform, what are your prospects for the economy of Africa in the next few years, as the case may be, or even a decade?
Africa is rich in natural resources. The prospect lies in the efficient management and efficient allocation of these resources. Okay. If Africa can check corruption of its leaders, Africa has tremendous growth prospects in the sense that there are resources. We may not be exporting a lot of manufactured goods, but the world still spends a lot of money on importing from us natural resources. If you know how much Nigeria earns, it's tremendous in terms of foreign exchange, even from oil. not talk of gas. There's still these reserves. So if we can make good use of these oil resources to develop the infrastructure, education, agriculture, transportation, manpower development, there'll be rapid progress.
All right, Dr. Mashood Fashola, thank you very much for coming on the program
You're
today.
welcome.
All right. I also thank Dr. Oladiran Bello from South Africa, who joined us earlier on. Now, while some say economists are merely making up clever acronyms with the selection of countries, others believe the idea of BRICS and Mint is helpful. And the concept illustrates the way the global economic balance of power has shifted in the past 20 years. And in Nigeria's case, it illustrates the possibility that next best economy in the world could well be in Africa. That's our show for today. Keep your comments coming on Twitter at TVC Africa Today, or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. And until we come your way again, I am Mike Okwoche. And don't forget, this is Africa. Bye for now.